everyone, welcome to my channel. My name's Jane and today's video is a tutorial, step-by-step tutorial on how to make one of my favourite blouse patterns. In fact, it's the one I'm wearing. It's the Oakridge Blouse by Sewaholic Patterns. If you fancy having a go at making one, don't be frightened because it's got cuffs and it's got a bow. Don't be frightened, I'm going to show you how easy it is in this step-by-step tutorial. So grab your pattern, grab your fabric, and let's get into the tutorial. Right, so you need to obviously cut out your size that you've chosen and all your pieces. So you need the back, which is cut on the fold, you need the cuffs, the tie, the button band, the binding for the cuff area, the front, and the sleeves. So I chose size 8 purely going off the finished body measurements. I am size 38 bust, 29 waist and a 40 hip. So I went off the finished measurements for size 8, just so you know. And I also used throughout this tutorial a 1 centimetre seam allowance rather than the 1.5 centimetre seam allowance that the pattern suggests. I just thought I'd just give myself that little bit of extra ease, and I did mine at 1 centimetre, but please feel free to follow the pattern and do the 1.5 centimetre if that suits you better. So obviously I'm just laying out all my pieces as best I can, making full use of my fabric and cutting them out. And I like to use a rotary cutter. Some people prefer scissors, I prefer the rotary, and I'm just snipping all my notches. And I shall show you how I mark my dart. I pop a pin in at the point of the dart and use one of my heat removable pens, and I just peel back the fabric, so you're then now looking at the wrong side of the fabrics, and I just make a mark where the pin shows through on both points, and that's really accurate for marking the top of my dart. And then I'm just quickly marking the base of the darts, the dart legs as well, just so for when I pin them together and sew them. So just continue cutting out all your pieces and obviously all your notches as necessary. And I was just trying to make full use of getting the tie on, because the tie is cut on the bias, so I was just making sure I could get it on to the full advantage of the fabric, and I just about squeezed mine on, as you can see there. So cut everything out, ready for sewing. So once you've got all your pattern pieces cut out and you've made sure you've made all the notches and markings that you need to do, we're now ready to begin sewing. And we're going to work this pattern as it says in the instructions. We're just going to go through all the steps. So step 1 is apply our interfacing to the cuffs and the front button bands. And I must apologise for the state of my ironing board. It is a right mess, and I definitely need to give it a good new cover, I think. But yeah, so just ignore my disgraceful ironing board. So yeah, so let's just fuse our interfacing to our pieces. Step 2, we are then going to sew the darts. So as you can see, I've made my marks with my heat removable pen, and I'm just drawing in the dart legs from one point to the apex where I marked before to the other point, and I do that obviously for both sides. So 2 darts. You don't have to do it this way if you're quite confident in just pinning along from the point to the legs, but I like to draw my lines in. It just makes more of an accurate dart. And then you just need to obviously pin the point, the tip of the dart there, and then match up the legs and pin through your line, and then we're just going to sew both darts on the sewing machine, and just back stitch at the beginning, and then just following that stitching line all the way to the top of the dart. And when you get to the top of the dart, I like to back tack, but not everybody does. You can just continue straight off the edge of the dart and then tie the loose threads in a knot. And then you need to obviously press your darts downwards towards the hem. So nice press, and try to press through each step as we go along, because it does make for a better outcome at the end. So step 3, we're going to stay stitch the front necklines, and all that means is stitching within the seam allowance, reduce your stitch length slightly, and just stitch all the way around the necklines for the fronts and the back, and this prevents your pattern pieces from stretching out as you're working with the garment. So you can just see me just adding my stay stitch there. So moving on to step 4, we're going to sew the fronts to the back by the shoulders and the side seams. So just pin your front shoulders together, always with right side facing, the right side of your fabrics facing each other. And again for the side seams, and make sure your darts are facing downwards. And once you've pinned both the sides and both of the shoulders, we are just going to take it to the machine and stitch using your seam allowance that you've chosen. And once we've done that, we're then going to neaten the edges. Now you can either use your overlocker, which I am using throughout this tutorial. If you don't have an overlocker, you can still neaten the edges by using a zigzag stitch on your machine, or if you don't even have a zigzag stitch, you can use pinking shears, which works just as good. So yeah, so we're just going to sew all 4 edges there, 2 shoulders and 2 sides. And once you've neatened your edges, I'm just going to press the seams, press the seam allowances towards the back on the shoulders, and again on the sides press the seams as well. So we're going to skip step 5 and go straight on to step 6, because we're using view A, and we're going to attach our button bands. So line up your button bands against the edge of the blouse, both sides at the front, with right sides together, and you have the curved, there's like a curved edge on the button band that needs to be at the top to match the curve of the neckline. So just make sure you've got the curved edge of the button band at the top, and obviously put raw edges together, right sides together, and pin all the way down. And then we're just going to sew both button bands. You can just see the curved edge there of the button band at the top. It follows neatly with the curve of the neckline, so make sure you've got your button band the right way up. And again, we're just going to press with the seam allowances pressed away towards the button band, away from the shirt, pressed towards the button band. And obviously we're going to repeat that for both sides, both button bands. And once you've pressed that, we're then going to turn over 1.5 centimeters on the other edge. So just using my ruler there just to mark 1.5 centimeters, and I'm just going to press that inwards. So this is the raw edge of the button band, just going to press it in, so press that edge in and repeat for the other side. And when we come to step 7, I think there's a little bit of a mistake in the instructions there, and we don't fold the button band back on itself, we fold it over. So you're going to fold over your button band wrong sides together, as you can see here. Fold it over wrong sides together. The instructions do say fold it back over, but I found that didn't work for me. So yeah, so we're just going to fold the button band wrong sides together. We're going to meet up that lovely folded edge with the stitching line and pin all the way down, and do that obviously for both sides. And we're going to do 2 rows of top stitching, so edge stitch. So step 8, we're going to edge stitch down both sides, so just towards the edge of the fold line there. Nice neat stitch. And then we're going to repeat that on the opposite side of the button band, again with a nice little edge stitch or top stitch with your needle a few millimeters away from that folded edge. Again, just gives a nice neat finish to your button band, and obviously we're going to do that for both button bands, as you can see me doing there. So moving on to step 9, we're going to do the hem. Now I like to overlock the edge of my hem, which gives a really nice neat finish. So I'm just overlocking the edge of my bottom of the blouse there, the raw edge, and I'm not trimming anything off. I'm just literally overlocking just on the edge of the fabric there, just to finish off the edge, ready for me to press my hem up. Alternatively, you can just press up 1 centimeter and then press it over again to give you your 2 centimeters hem. It's either way, it doesn't really matter, as long as you get a nice neat hem folded up by 2 centimeters. So I'm just trimming away that, well, not trimming away, I'm just overlocking the edge there, ready to press up, as you can see. So it's not much difference to folding it over twice if you prefer, and then just stitch your hem neatly in place. So moving on to step 10, we're going to work on the bow tie. So we're just going to join the 2 short ends of the bow tie and stitch across, obviously with right sides together. So stitch across there, and then once you've stitched, press that seam open so it's nicely pressed, like you can see I've done there. And then we're going to pin the tie to the blouse, so working with the seam of that tie there we've just done, and matching up the middle notch on the back of the blouse. There's a notch there, line those 2 up and then pin your bow tie all the way to the edge of the button band, as you can see me there. So just pin all the way along, easing that tie just onto the blouse neckline, as you can see me doing there. And we're just going to pin all the way to the end of both button bands. And you can see I'm lining up my notch that should meet your button band. And we're just going to stitch all the way along from one edge of the button band all the way to the other edge of the button band, and stop at the button band. Do not go beyond there, you don't need to. So just stitching all along, and I'm just making sure that I'm catching both pieces of fabric nice and neatly, going across that center join there all the way around the other side of the neck area. And you can just see I'm coming to the end of the bow tie there, and you can see I'm just going to stop when I come to the button band. You can see there I'm just neatening up and straightening up my tie, just to straighten up with the edge of the button band, and you just finish there. And I'm going to press that seam allowance away again. So moving on to step 11, we're now going to fold over the tie. So with right sides together now, fold over your tie, matching those points there, and pin all the way along. And you're going to pin up to where the tie meets the blouse. So you're just going to pin, as you can see, up to where the tie meets the button band of the blouse, and we're going to stop there with our sewing. So pin up to there and do that on both sides. So again, right sides together, fold over your tie, match up your points on the corner there, and pin all the way along to the next point where the button band meets the blouse. And sew all the way to each button band and stop there where the pin is, and repeat on the other side. And when you come to the point there of the tie, just leave your needle in the fabric and pivot, raise your foot, pivot round, and then continue sewing all the way along. So you leave your needle in the fabric, lift, raise your foot, pivot, put your foot back down, and then continue sewing. And that's how you go around angles when you're sewing. And as I say, you just sew to the point where you meet the button band on the blouse. So where I've got the pin there, we're just going to stop our sewing just there and back tack a little bit. And then just repeat that on the other side for the other side of the bow. And once we've completed both sides, we're just going to turn it through. I'm just using a crochet hook, and I'm just popping my crochet hook on the end and popping it through like so. It's much quicker that way. And just do it for both sides. As you can see, you're just finding the end there and just literally popping the crochet hook down through the channel there, and then you can catch it and then pull it out. And I'm just going to pop my crochet hook back in the ends and just use the point just to get a nice neat sharp points there on either end of the tie before I obviously stitch it all up. And then you get a lovely neat finish by doing it this way. Or you can use a knitting needle, anything that's got a nice sharp point, but don't obviously be careful when you're poking it through. You don't poke all the way through the fabric, so just be a little bit gentle, but you do get a nice neat edge there. So I'm just going to press the bow tie there, both sides. And then once you've done that, and then we're going to take the remaining raw edge of the tie and we're going to press over the seam allowance there, and then we're just going to fold it over, the tie over on itself so it meets the stitching line, and just pin all the way along. And you just tuck in that button band. It should tuck in lovely and neat inside the tie there. And just pin all the way along. So when you're pinning, I like to stitch in the ditch from the right side, so we're pinning here This is the back and there's the front, so I'm pinning from the front, making sure I'm catching in the underside of the tie there. So in through the seam, and I'm making sure I'm catching it in. Again, just lining up the edge of the tie, popping my pin in where I'm going to stitch in the ditch, and oops, so I didn't catch it there, so just, there we go. Make sure you're catching both sides of the tie in on both sides, and then we're just going to stitch in the ditch all the way along from the outside, making sure you catch in the underside of the tie. So for step 12, we're now going to work on the sleeves, and we're going to be working on the cuff sections. So we're going to take our placket pieces there and the cuffs, and taking the sleeves, we're going to stay stitch all the way around the placket edge there. So just a little stay stitch within the seam allowance, just like I've done there off camera, and then we're going to pin the placket pieces onto that sleeve. Firstly, we're going to just press over 1/4 of an inch on one of the long sides on both placket pieces, as you can see me doing there, and we're going to pin the unpressed pieces on step 13 to the sleeve, that slit. Can you see the slit there? So the unpressed edge, right sides together. So just pin all the way along, and you might have to manipulate the sleeve there, as you can see me doing there. And when you come to the piece, the section in the middle, you think it's not going to work, it will catch in. I'm just adding one more pin there at the V section of the placket, and then you're just going to stitch all the way along. Do that for both sleeves, and you will catch in that section there. Do that for both sleeves. So you can see me just sewing along that placket. Just take your time for this section. It can be a little bit fiddly trying to get the sleeve with the placket, but it does catch, you will catch it in, and I'll just show you what it looks like. As you can see there, you do catch it in there. So you do that for both sleeves, and once you've done that, you're going to then turn over that placket binding and pin it down. So turn it over that folded edge, turn it over, fold it over to meet the stitching line, pin it down, and then we're going to top stitch all the way along to secure it in place. So step 14, we're just going to sew a little diagonal stitching line on the placket. So placing right sides together, pin just to the top there, and just stitch a diagonal line across the top, the folded edge of the placket, as you can see, like I've done there. So when it folds over nice and neat. So do that for both sides, and just press down in place, and then we're just going to stitch over one of the plackets to keep it in place. The placket that is on the widest part of the sleeve, we're just going to baste that in place so it keeps it down for when you add the cuff. So I do that on both sleeves. The plackets that is on the widest part of the sleeve. We're just going to baste just within the seam allowance to keep it down. As you can see, I've done there. And it stops it moving for when we put the cuff on. So step 15, we are going to do 2 rows of gathering stitch on the sleeve cap. This is just to ease the sleeve into the blouse. So we're just going to run 2 rows of gathering stitch between the notches. And I've just set my machine stitch length to the longest, which is 5 on my machine, and I've just run 2 rows there, as you can see, and did that for both sleeves. And once we've done that, we're going to put right sides together and pin our sleeves down the side of each sleeve and stitch from top to bottom on both sleeves. And then just finish with your preferred method of neatening the edge of the sleeves there. And once we've done that, we are then ready to add our cuffs to the sleeve. So step 16, we are going to take both of our cuffs and we're going to press over on one long edge of each cuff piece onto the wrong side. So pressing over 1.5 centimeters on the long side of one of each cuffs. So you can see me there measuring my 1.5 centimeter. And just take it to the ironing board and press them down so they're nice and neat. And then once we've done that for both cuffs, you can see we have a notch for the center of each of the cuff. We're going to fold over at that notch, so folding over with right sides together, so you'll find that your cuff doesn't meet at the edges because one is longer than the other, but you're folding it at that center notch and it should look like you can see me there. And we're going to stitch the seam allowances at both of those short ends. So you've got 4 ends to sew, obviously, on the 2 cuffs. So stitching right across both of the ends of your cuffs. And once we've done that, we're just going to trim off the bulk there just a little bit, so it makes it easier to turn the cuff through. So I'm just trimming off just that little bit of excess there without going into my stitching line, obviously. Turn your cuffs to the right side, and again I'm using my crochet hook just to get a nice sharp crisp corner on both of the cuffs, and give it a quick press. As you can see there, makes a difference when you press everything. And we're ready to go to step 17, and we're going to add the cuffs to the sleeves. So with right sides together, you're going to line up the raw edge of your cuff, line it up with the raw edge of the bottom of the sleeve, and pin in place, and the cuff should fit perfectly with the edge of the sleeve. And I'm just going to sew my cuff very close to the folded edge of the cuff, but not obviously not on it. So just lowering my needle, move my hand out the way, and I'm just stitching very close to that folded edge, attaching the cuff to the sleeve. taking my time and just removing the pins as I go along. Not quite catching, but just almost close to that folded edge of the cuff. So when we've sewn it together, it folds in nice and neatly. So you can see I'm just on the edge of that folded part of the cuff, not quite. Stitching along to the end, and then back tacking, and then once you've done that, obviously for both cuffs, you can then tuck in the raw edges underneath the folded edge, and it all neatly goes in place. So I'm just pinning it along now, so the folded edge of the cuff is being pinned to the stitching line where I stitched the cuff, the raw edge of the cuff to the sleeve, just tucking in all the edges there and pin in place. And then I'm just going to top stitch along the edge to keep all that nice and neat in place. So moving on to step 18, we're almost there. We're going to add the sleeves to the blouse. Now I didn't need to pull any of my gathering threads for my sleeves. My sleeves fit in perfectly without having to add any ease there with the gathering threads. But depending on your fabric, you may need to pull on the gathering threads just to ease your sleeve cap into the sleeve hole there. So just lining up the seam line of your sleeve with the side seam of the blouse, and then lining up your notches. Make sure you've got the right sleeve in, so your two notches should meet there, and that's the back of the sleeve. And if you find you've got one notch matching up with two notches, then you've got the wrong sleeve in. You need to take the sleeve out and swap it over. Your notches must match, so one notch must match the other one notch, because the one notch means it's the front of the sleeve and the two notches means it's the back of the sleeve. And as you can see, I don't need to ease mine in at all, but if you do, you would ease it in here at the top of the sleeve cap, pulling on your thread slightly just to ease it in. Pin all the way around, do for both sleeves, and stitch your sleeve in place. And once you've stitched it in place, just neaten with your preferred method of neatening. So the last step, step 19, we're going to add our buttonholes, and I like to use again my heat erasable pen, and I've chosen to put 4 buttons on the band and obviously 1 per cuff, and I've just marked on the cuff there with my pen, and then I'm just going to mark the top placement for where I want my top button and the placement for my bottom button. And then I'm just going to add 2 more buttonholes, and I'm just using this ingenious little gadget where you can then add your buttons evenly. So I'm just going to make my marks there. So I've got my 4 button placements. Equally, you can use a tape measure, or you can use the button placements on the pattern piece. And then I'm just rifling through my vintage button tin to find some nice buttons. And in the end, I went for some that I had on a card. Some vintage buttons are on a card, and then just add my buttonhole. Obviously, machine does it beautifully, most machines do. So just adding my 4 buttonholes on the button band, just making sure they're all lined up centrally, And once I've made my buttonholes on the cuffs and the band, I like to pop a pin at the top of the buttonhole stitching, and then using my seam ripper, rip the buttonhole up to the pin, and the seam ripper cannot go any further because the pin's in the way, so that prevents you from, you know, ripping through your buttonhole. And I use that method all the time and it works for me every time. And then I'm just laying over my button band over the other button band and marking the centre of the buttonholes with my pen. And then I'm just going to sew my pretty little white vintage buttons on. But you can add as many buttons as you prefer. I've chosen 4, but you can have 5, you could have 6, whatever you prefer. And just stitch them in place, and again stitch your buttons to your cuffs. And how easy was that to make the Oakridge blouse buttonholes, cuffs and collar. And it really is a lovely simple sewing pattern, so I hope you've enjoyed making it. And don't forget, you can always pause the video, rewind if you need to go back on a few steps. But yeah, that's the Oakridge blouse. So hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. I absolutely love this blouse. This is my 5th blouse that I've made, and there it is that I made in the tutorial in this gorgeous off-white. I would say it's not brilliant white, off-white cotton dobby, and I popped some pictures up of me wearing it with my corduroys, but this is going to be well worn with almost everything in my wardrobe. And the reason why I love it so much, I think, is because it's a great layering piece. I've made it in the cotton obviously, and it's nice and light, not too thick or anything like that, so I can wear it throughout the year, which is perfect for me. I like to be able to wear all my clothes as much as I can throughout all the seasons, and it's just great for layering under my knitted grandad vests, under my poppy pinafores. And so I hope you've enjoyed making yours. Share with me your makes over on Instagram, and don't forget to tag me in Loopy Mabel's Closet. I'd love to see what you made and what version of fabric you used. And thumbs up if you enjoyed today's tutorial, and don't forget to subscribe if you just found me and you'd like to follow along with me. I'd love for you to join me and come over and see me on Instagram too, and you can follow along with all my daily outfits and inspiration on how to maybe use what you've made and create different outfits out of your wardrobe. So yeah, so hope you enjoyed it, and thumbs up if you did, and I'll hopefully see you on my next sewing vlog. Until the next time though, please take care, and as always, happy sewing.